Oh, there's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am again tempting fate. We're not expecting a typhoon today, but it's supposed to rain most of the day, and it's about 9 o'clock. A little later than I like to film, but it's not raining, just cloudy. And here I am in my park, another place in the park. I'm not in love with the background. There's a tree growing out of my head, but we'll just go with it, shall we? And I didn't bring my pocket Wi-Fi today, and I did the same thing last night. What's wrong with my head? Don't answer that. So I don't have access to the internet, so I'm going to be doing this from memory because I can't get onto my Goodreads. But I think we're in good shape here. Thanks for all your concern. The typhoon was pretty much a non-event where we live in Tokyo. Poor people, about 50 people lost their lives outside of Tokyo or around Tokyo, but Tokyo was basically safe. But at 20 after 6 in the evening, when the gale force winds and the torrential rain were descending upon us, there was an earthquake. Kenji was in the bath, and I was sitting by myself in the living room, and I thought, God hates me. A typhoon and an earthquake? No way. But the earthquake was strong, but 5 seconds long, and that was it. And then the typhoon petered out before 11 p.m., so we slept soundly, and that was the end of that story, except, again, for dozens of people who didn't fare as well as I did. So yeah, I'm fine. I've had a great reading week and pretty interesting some things. So I finished No Bales last week, and I finished two interesting books. One that was absolutely delightful, and that was Barbara Pym's first posthumous novel, the first one that was published after her death, and that was An Unsuitable Attachment. And this was a 5-star read. It's not the best Barbara Pym novel I've read, but it was a delightful Barbara Pym novel that just filled me with joy, so that equals a 5-star read. It doesn't come up to the level of my 3 favorites. I get asked this question every time I'd mention her, so I'm going to put it right out there. My 3 favorites are her debut, Some Tame Gazelle, A Glass of Blessings, and No Fond Return of Love. Most people say Excellent Women is her best, and I don't agree, but it's good. It's really good. And this one was maybe rivaled that. An Unsuitable Attachment. She had been working on it in the 60s. If I remember correctly, it was not her first rejection in the 1960s that ushered in 16 years in the literary wilderness, but it might have been the second one she submitted that was also rejected, and then she didn't try again for over a decade. But it's earlier Pym, so it's much more lighthearted and much more the themes of her early work, which is about awkwardly single women of a certain age, usually late 30s and thereabouts, fumbling around distractedly searching for love, or at least a boyfriend, and just having a hysterically funny time doing it, while also the story reveals the depth of their loneliness in a way that is like, it's not just a comedy for me. It's like, oh, I really relate to that. I was single for 2 decades. I mean, in a meaningful way I was single. In a meaningless way I was very rarely single, but that's not what this video is about. Yes, I just loved it. Ange and I did a buddy read together, and we just both felt like it was like coming home. The last one before this, which I believe was the last novel published before she died in January 1980, was A Few Green Leaves, and it was pretty good, but it wasn't as good as An Unsuitable Attachment. And then the one before that was The Sweet Dove Died, which was so bleak and almost dark and very little humor, if any. So we really felt like we were coming home. That's all I'm going to say. I don't think I'm going to do a full review of it. It's absolutely delightful. I don't recommend you start with it, but I recommend that you eventually get to it, because it was a breath of fresh Pymian air for me. Oh, and maybe a little bit less successfully, but still interesting. I just finished about 30 minutes ago the Ronald Furbank novel that I started at the end of last month for Gone with the Book. And it is called Concerning the Eccentricities of Cardinal Pirelli by Ronald Furbank, published in 1926, I think. And despite it only being about 90 pages, it took me this long to read it because it was a bit of a tough slog. I think I'm going to do a full review, which will be kind of a mashup with In Other Words, because the thing that slowed me down was there was so much unfamiliar vocabulary that I had to consult Google or my dictionary about, on average, 3 times per sentence. And, I think my vocabulary is fairly good, but to get through a page, it took 15 minutes, and then it was very difficult to keep the thread of the story. The plot was much less important to this text than was the sensibility. It is so campy. It outwilds Oscar Wilde in its campiness, and that was delightful, but in a ponderous way. So I ended up giving it 4 stars because I'm glad that I did it. And I know that if I gave it 3 stars now, I'd probably change it to 4 stars the more I thought about it. And I just decided, no, it was a 4-star read, but I didn't enjoy it. I don't know how much more of his writing I want to read, but it was interesting. It held my interest, and I'm going to give you, in the review thing I do later, I'm going to kind of try to explain that more, but I have finally read a Ronald Furbank, and so I'm still toying with the idea of trying the 500-page biography of him for Nonfiction November. I'm sitting on the fence yet. When I talk about what I have started, I'm gonna preface it with a story about the wide variety of Victorian prose styles and my reaction thereto, because I had quite an adventure the other day. I started George Meredith's novel, Diana of the Crossways, and I couldn't get past the first 3 or 4 pages. Let me share one of the paragraphs somewhere in that first chapter that did me in. I don't remember if this is the one I didn't mark it as a bail. It was more just a little taste of it that didn't taste very good. Just gave me a freaking headache. The verbosity and pomposity of this writing, I just couldn't deal. The instances of her drollery are rather hinted by the diarist for the benefit of those who had met her and could inhale the atmosphere at a word. Drolleries, humours, reputed witticisms are like odours of roast meats, passed with the picking of the joint. Idea is the only vital breath. They have it rarely, or it eludes the chronicler. To say of the great, erratic, and forsaken Lady A, after she had accepted the consolations of Bacchus, that her name was properly signified in asterisks, as she was now knightly and Ariadne in heaven through her god, sounds to us a roundabout, with wit somewhere and fun nowhere. Sitting at the roast, we might have thought differently. Perry Wilkinson is not happier in citing her reply to his compliment on the reviewer's unanimous eulogy of her humour and pathos. The merry clown and poor pantaloon demanded of us in every work of fiction, she says, lamenting the writer's compulsion to go on producing them for applause until it is extremest age that knocks their knees. We are informed by Lady Pennon of the most amusing description of the first impressions of a pretty English simpleton in Paris. And here is an opportunity for ludicrous contrast of the French and English styles of pushing flatteries. Piping to the charmed animal, as Mrs. Warwick terms it in another place. But Lady Pennon was acquainted with the silly woman of the piece, and found her amusement in the wonderful truth of that representation. That kind of writing is not without its charms, but it gives me a freaking headache, and it's so, no, it was a 400 or 500 page novel, and with that writing style, it would take me 17 months to read. So no, I'm not going to read it. And I did study another Meredith novel as an undergrad in the prehistoric era, The Ordeal of Richard Feverel, and I have a vague memory that I really struggled to get through that one as well. So no, I was wondering, why does nobody ever talk about George Meredith on BookTube during Victober? And I think I know the answer. So have you ever read George Meredith? Did you like that passage? Like I say, I could kind of get into certain felicitous phrasings, but no. That was not enjoyable to read 4 or 5 pages of that. And I hereby recant the ridiculous statement I made. I think that the typhoon had affected my brain, but no, I don't need an excuse for making stupid pronouncements that I retract the following week. It's my style. So I said last week, what did I say? I think obscure novelists are obscure because they're no good. What do you think? Most of you probably just rolled your eyes like, what a stupid thing. They didn't even deign to reply, and I don't blame you. So that's ridiculous. Some are unknown, some are obscure. Whatever obscure means, that's so relative and, depends on what you're talking about. I just announced yesterday that my favorite novelist is the Cora Sandell, who was obscure within her own country until late in her life and has only been available in English since the 1960s. Most of her fiction being published 30 years before. So she's the writer that speaks most deeply to my soul these days. So just shut up, Sean. Anyway, after I rejected poor Georgie there, I went directly from that to trying the ebook of the novel by Lucas Malet, the pseudonym for Mary St. Leger Kingsley. And the novel is called The Gateless Barrier. It's just under 300 pages on Scribd as an ebook. And listen to this opening paragraph. The contrast in prose styles and my reaction couldn't have been starker. Lawrence leaned his arms upon the broad wooden handrail of the bulwarks. The water hissed away from the side. Immediately below, it was laced by shifting patterns of white foam and stained pale green, violet, and amber by the light shining out through the rounds of the portholes. Further away, it showed blue-black, but for a glistening on the hither side of the vast ridge and furrow. The smoke from the funnels streamed afar and was upturned by a following wind. The great ship swung in the trough and then lifted as a horse lifts at a fence, while the seas slid away from under her keel. As she lifted, her masts raked the blue-black night sky, and the stars danced in the rigging. So that was just gobsmackingly crisp and really inviting prose, and it's continued. So I am several chapters into The Gateless Barrier, and even though I found out when I was filming my TBR, because I don't do very much prep work except once the camera is turned on, that there is at least a bit of a ghost story. I don't care. I'm just enjoying the writing and the characters. The story is very interesting. It's about a British man who has emigrated to America and has an American wife. He is the heir to his crusty old uncle back in England, and his uncle's on his deathbed and sends for him. So he goes back alone, and as soon as the uncle kicks the bucket, he will inherit this vast estate and gorgeous house full of antiquarian books and secret rooms and stuff. So it's setting up an atmosphere. So I'm actually inadvertently and perhaps somewhat reluctantly doing Spooktober, because it's going to be a little of a supposed to be kind of a scary story. I hope to not only get through it, but to enjoy it. Just to say, yes, I've read a ghost story that didn't make me puke. But that's not what I want to talk about today. What I wanted to make very clear to you was that nobody's ever heard of Lucas Malet. And the writing is as good as much else of what I've been reading this month for Victober. So, a new discovery, an obscure writer who may well need me and all of you to be rescued from obscurity. So that was fabulous. I love that so much. So that's the only one I've started, and that'll be it for Victober. I don't think I won't try to squeeze any more in. And so the only book that I am planning to fit in at the end of the month, and this will be starting next Thursday, which is when Gone with the Book October starts, and I will be buddy reading this novel from Persephone, Despised and Rejected by Rose Alatini, and it was originally published in 1918 under the pseudonym A.T. Fitzroy, and it is a book about queer people, gays and lesbians in the early 20th century, and it's the historical value of it. I don't know about the literary value, I'll let you know, but I am, ever since, I think I was vaguely aware of its existence, but when Eric Carl Anderson hauled it last year sometime, I bought it because I want to read that, so I'm finally getting into it for Gone with the Book. And oh, sorry, Heidi always scolds me if I don't show you the end papers, and it's a pretty chunky book, but the margins are big. It's about 350 pages. I have more to say about that next week. I think that's all I've got. I will say that I am dithering and wavering on my commitment to going hardcore with Nonfiction November this year. I'm really not feeling it. I am going to do one buddy read, so if I'm only doing one or two, I'm not going to make a TBR. It'll just fold into my Friday reads. Yeah, I just want to read more fiction. I mean, I had a good experience last year, but it didn't increase my desire to read more nonfiction. It made me realize that when I'm in the right space to read nonfiction, and for me, nonfiction is always about fiction. So it's biographies of my favorite writers, or maybe essays about literature, or history that will help me dive all the more deeply into the novels. There's no other kind of nonfiction that is relevant. I suppose I should say for me, but I mean it's not relevant if it's not about fiction, people. Fiction is where it's at. So I'm not sure. I might not do very much. I have a whole bunch of buddy reads next month, and very few of them are nonfiction. So yeah, I think it's going to be a minimalist nonfiction November. I always remember it was my worst pun I've ever made on BookTube. 2 years ago, I committed to doing Nonfiction November, and I bailed on all 3 or 4 of the books that I was reading. And so then on that Friday reads, I announced, because this was just after Brexit was big in the news or whatever, and I said, I'm here to announce Nonfiction Novexit. So I hope that doesn't happen this year. But anyway, that will all shake out the way it's meant to shake out, and I'm going to close. I'm going to say goodbye, and then I'm going to give you a little panorama of the park, this new park that has just opened about 3 weeks or a month ago, a block from my house, to show you, because I haven't shown you yet. All right, so happy reading. So that's where I was sitting. This is the upper level. There's the lower level that's much greener. There's a whole bunch of benches around this winding path all the way down to the street on this level. See the yellow? But unless it's a cloudy day, there's no protection from the sun with all these young trees, hey? So that's why I really wanted to come out today. Big benches here. Now, I don't know why Japanese parks always have this as a roof. It doesn't protect you from the rain. What's the purpose of it? And then this is where I started to film yesterday. So it has, see those benches, and there's the trees. So that makes a nice backdrop. So I should have probably gone back there. And then there's just a big play area for sports games and stuff down there. Huge. My house is over there somewhere. This is the lower level. There's a lovely modern playground over there. Some kind of a little community center building. Again, quite a few benches, but with no protection from the sun. And the thing that I love the most, in terms of, I think it's such a great idea, is over in this corner down below, there is a huge winding kind of paddling pool for kids. Japanese parks are so ugly and dysfunctional or non-functional. There it is down there, see? But it goes all the way along here, and kids just are in heaven playing in the paddling pool. So that is the park. What do you think?